War and Peace is not, in its core, a novel about war. It is not, in its core, a novel about peace. It is the longest argument in 19th-century literature against the idea that any individual, Napoleon, Alexander, you, me, has ever genuinely understood the events that swept their life. It contains, depending on which edition you read, between 580,000 and 600,000 words. Tolstoy wrote and rewrote the opening chapters 15 times. He produced 4 entirely different versions of the manuscript before he was satisfied. By the end, he was so exhausted that he told his wife he never wanted to write another novel. And the great argument that the book contains, the argument that almost every reader misses because they are too distracted by the dance scenes and the love stories, was an argument with himself. Tolstoy was 35 years old when he started War and Peace in 1863. He was newly married. He had retired to his family estate, Yasnaya Polyana, 200 kilometers south of Moscow. He had been, for the previous 10 years, a Russian artillery officer in the Crimean War, a travel writer in Europe, a half-failed novelist, a heavy drinker, a gambler, a serial seducer of peasant women on his own estate, and the founder of an experimental school for the children of his serfs. He was, in nearly every reading of his life, a man who had not yet decided what he was. War and Peace is the book in which he tried to decide. The official subject, on the surface, was the Napoleonic invasion of Russia in 1812. 3 generations of Russian aristocrats, the Rostovs, the Bolkonskys, the Bezukovs, the Kuragins, moved through the campaign and through the long peace before and after it. Pierre Bezukov inherits a fortune and a Masonic crisis. Andrei Bolkonsky tries to find himself in the army and fails. Natasha Rostov falls in love 3 times, twice catastrophically. Napoleon arrives. Moscow burns. Napoleon retreats. The Russian army does not, in any decisive battle, defeat him, but he goes home, beaten, with his army in shreds. But here is the question almost every reader misses. Why is the book so long? The answer is not that Tolstoy was being indulgent. The answer is that Tolstoy did not believe in the conventional historical novel, and he could not write one. Every time he tried, every time he sat down to describe, in dramatic dynamic prose, what Napoleon was thinking before Austerlitz, or what Kutuzov was thinking before Borodino, he stopped. Because he did not believe the men running those battles had any idea what was happening. This is the great heretical argument of the book. And it is buried, deliberately, in the middle of the action. Tolstoy interrupts the narrative again and again, sometimes for a page, sometimes for 30 pages, to insist that the historians have got it wrong. Napoleon did not lose because he made a strategic error. Kutuzov did not win because he was wiser. The Russian campaign was not the product of 2 minds in conflict. It was the result of millions of small actions, millions of soldiers and millions of small decisions about whether to march another mile, whether to load the cannon, whether to run, whether to die. And the great men sitting in tents on the high ground had as much real control over the outcome as a single piece of paper has over the storm carrying it. History, Tolstoy is arguing, is not made by great men. It is made by what he called the infinitesimal differentials of countless wills. We tell ourselves the story of Napoleon afterwards. The story is a comfort. It is not the truth. But here's what that argument actually ignores. Or, rather, what it never quite lets itself say. If history is not made by individuals, then no individual is responsible for anything. The serf-owning landowner cannot be blamed for serfdom. He is a piece of paper in a storm. The general cannot be blamed for the dead at Borodino. He is a piece of paper in a storm. Tolstoy, the heir to 2,000 serfs at Yasnaya Polyana, the man who would later spend the second half of his life trying to give away his fortune and free his peasants and atone for his own social position, was writing himself, deliberately or not, out of moral responsibility. War and Peace is, in part, the long act of a Russian aristocrat trying to convince himself that he is innocent. He would, after he finished the book, spend the next 40 years undoing that conclusion. The late Tolstoy, the Christian anarchist who refused all worldly authority, including his own, is the man War and Peace, in 1869, had not yet been able to become. There is, in the middle of the novel, a scene that the philosopher Isaiah Berlin used as the centerpiece of his most famous essay. Prince Andrei Bolkonsky, lying wounded on the battlefield of Austerlitz, looks up at the sky. The clouds are moving slowly above him. He has been told, all his life, that Napoleon is a great man, that the campaign is glorious, that the war has meaning. He looks at the sky and realizes that all of that is small. Nothing matters except the sky. This is the moment at which the entire heroic frame of the book breaks. It is also, in a deeper reading, the moment at which Tolstoy himself stops being able to write a conventional novel. Because if no event matters, you cannot have a plot. He found a way around it. He found a way to write a novel that pretends to be a plot while it is secretly an argument that plots are a lie. The four main characters, Pierre, Andrei, Natasha, and Maria, do not arrive at their endings by anything resembling a conventional narrative arc. Pierre is captured by the French in the burning of Moscow and is held for weeks in the company of a small peasant named Platon Karateev. Karateev says almost nothing. He sings to himself. He is killed, casually, by a French soldier on the retreat from Moscow. Pierre, listening to him die, suddenly understands something. He cannot, when he tries later to explain it, say what he has understood. He goes home. He marries Natasha. The book ends in domestic peace. This ending has frustrated readers for 150 years. The Wagnerian climax never happens. The strategic decisive battle never comes. The two ranking generals of the war, Napoleon and Kutuzov, are both, by the final pages, characters that the book has stopped taking seriously. The story closes, instead, with two married couples, for small children, an argument about politics at the breakfast table, and a long epilogue in which Tolstoy spends 70 pages re-explaining his theory of history to make sure you haven't missed it. What was Tolstoy actually trying to do? Here is the third reading, and it is the one most modern critics now accept. War and Peace is a book that uses the genre of the historical novel as a trap. You come in expecting the heroic story of Russia repelling the French. You are pulled along by the love affairs, the duels, the balls. And somewhere around the 400th page you realize, if you are reading carefully, that the book has been quietly arguing all along that none of these things mean what you thought they meant. The dance scenes are not romantic. They are illustrations of how social bodies move without their participants knowing why. The battles are not strategic. They are illustrations of how no plan ever survives contact with another person. The love stories are not love stories. They are illustrations of how the things we say we want are revealed, by the slow grinding of time, to have been the wrong things. The book that Hollywood keeps trying to make of War and Peace is the book that the surface of the novel pretends to be. The book Tolstoy actually wrote is underneath. There are 5 things that Tolstoy himself said about War and Peace that almost no reader knows. The first is that he insisted, in an essay he published in 1868, that the book is not a novel. He called it, in his own phrasing, what the author wished and was able to express in the form in which it was expressed. He was, in other words, refusing the entire category. The second is that he believed the most important character in the book is Platon Karateev, the small peasant who appears for 30 pages and dies, and not Pierre or Andrei. The third is that he wanted, in the final years of his life, to disown the book entirely. He came to think of his late religious writings as the work that mattered and War and Peace as a kind of aristocratic indulgence. The fourth is that he wrote it, by his own account, while almost continuously unhappy. The fifth is that the manuscript he produced is partly the work of his wife, Sofia, who copied the entire novel by hand 7 times during its composition, often correcting his Russian as she went. Sofia Tolstoy's diary, which became after her death one of the great unread documents of the 19th century, contains some of the most clear-eyed criticism of Tolstoy as a person and as a writer that anyone has ever written. She knew the book better than any other reader because she had copied every word of it. She thought, by the end, that the historical chapters were tedious. She thought the great philosophical interruptions did not work. She thought the book would have been better if it had been a domestic novel, with the war kept off stage. She was, in some respects, right. Most modern editions of War and Peace include skipping suggestions. The philosophical chapters can be skipped on a first reading, the editors say. Few writers in history have created a book that has been so consistently edited by its readers for 2 centuries while remaining, by general agreement, one of the greatest novels ever written. What does the book actually mean today? Probably this. Every time you watch a public event, a war, an election, a financial collapse, and the morning newspaper tells you the story of why it happened in terms of a few great names, Tolstoy is asking you to hesitate. The newspaper, like the historian, like the war film, is offering you a comfort. The actual event was made of a million small wills. The story of the few great names is a tidy untruth that lets you sleep at night. If this changed how you think about the historical novel, subscribe. We break down the most important books ever written, one argument at a time. New video every week. And if this was worth 10 minutes of your life, hit like. It helps the channel more than you think.